This is Mr. Tan, and today we're looking at hospitality and tourism. So we're going to be looking at the module 202, THEL, and we're going to be focusing on questions 3, 4, and 6 from the assignment brief. So obviously we're going to start off with an introduction, looking at the questions 3, 4, and 6. We'll be breaking down the questions, looking at the keywords, and then we'll be looking at the assignment brief itself, and then from the assignment brief we'll be looking at the individual tasks that's required, and then we'll be looking at the evaluation and conclusions. So let's start off with the questions. The first question, which is question 3, it says here question 1, but it's question 3. It says adapt functions of HRM in tourism and or hospitality organizations. So adapt functions of HRM in tourism and or hospitality organizations. So in the first assignment we've looked at the functions, which we will go over again briefly, some of the functions of HRM in tourism and hospitality. Question 2 says critically assess the strategic contribution of human resource management to business success. So here we're kind of bringing in SHRM, strategic human resource management, and I suppose before that we are looking at hard and soft methods of HRM, and we are also taking into consideration best fit versus best practice, and then linking into SHRM. So we'll look at that. And then question 3 says assess the requirements of quality management schemes in human resource management. So we'll be looking at the requirements of quality management schemes. So we'll be looking at things like benchmarking, total quality management. We'll be briefly discussing JIT, just in time, and various other methods. But we'll be looking at the tools in total quality management that can be used to assess the requirements of quality management schemes. Let's look at the key words, because as well as the question, it's always important to remember there are key words in the questions, and we must ensure that not only do we answer the question, but we answer the key words in the question. Otherwise we really haven't answered the question. So in question 1, the key word there is to adapt. And to adapt means to make something suitable for a new use. In question 2, the keywords are critically assess. Here you must provide your opinion or verdict on whether an argument or set of research findings is accurate. And in question 3, the keyword there is to assess. According to the English dictionary, it says evaluate or estimate the nature, ability, or quality of. Evaluate or estimate. Assess. Okay. So the suggested layout is really taken from the assignment brief, and we have to follow the guidelines as detailed in the assignment brief. So what we're suggesting is, in the introduction, we'll be looking at what is particularly different about the nature of the tourism and hospitality industry and what makes human resources harder to manage. So we'll be looking at the difference in the types of people who work in this industry and how they differ in comparison to other industries in the UK generally. What methods are helping resolve these characteristics on the industry. These methods we'll be looking at kind of hard methods and soft methods. We'll be looking at best fit versus best practice in this section here. The next section, critically assess the strategic contribution of human resource management to business success. Why is human resource management important to the strategic business success of hospitality organizations? So here we'll be looking at SHRM, strategic human resource management, which kind of leads on from hard and best fit practices of HRM. And then the next question says, what difficulties are there in balancing strategic goals and employee goals? So obviously, in the previous question, we would have looked at SHRM and why HRM is so important to meeting the aims and objectives, the mission, the vision of the organization. So again, by looking at these hard methods in HRM, we'll be then saying to ourselves, well, what are the difficulties? And this is for the analysis for you in the next question. What is the difficulties in terms of balancing, in terms of HRM practice and meeting the strategic goals, as opposed to a degree in terms of soft methods of HRM, and in terms of employee goals? How does they kind of like what difficulties are there? Then the next question says, how does employee performance impact on a pursuit of strategic organization success? Well, again, we'll be looking at performance management, performance appraisal, which links into performance management. When you have a first meeting, the key criteria in the meeting for performance management, and the cycle performance management, and then what organizational successes statistically are you kind of like looking to obtain. Next, what are the current ways forward? We'll be looking at analytical, non-analytical methods. We'll be looking at causes that affect people to leave or want to leave. So we'll be looking at these, and then the last question: what are the requirements of quality management schemes? In methods of recruitment and retention. Here we'll be looking at we'll be mentioning benchmarking and JIT, just in time. We'll be looking at total quality management and the various tools that's required in these sections in order to help within this industry. A very important point, human resources, who do we want, why do we want them, where do we want them to go, what do we want them to have, how are we going to obtain them, and when do we need them. So these are the questions we're going to be looking at in terms of HRM, depending upon the approach that the organization might take. First, let's just recap in terms of hospitality and tourism industries. When we look at hospitality and tourism industries, we know that hospitality is actually different to tourism industries. So the hospitality includes things like the pubs, bars, nightclubs, contract service providers, membership clubs, events, gambling. But the travel services and tourist services are more tourism industries. Visitor attractions, youth hostels, holiday parks, self-catering are all part of hospitality. If we again go back to how we define tourism includes other industries like the retail travel agent, insurance companies, the ground transport, at least two sets of airport handling agents, airport services, the airlines for all different legs of the service. So it's always important when we talk about tourism and hospitality, it is always important to remember that hospitality is actually different from tourism, but we mention the tourism and hospitality industry as being one. But please bear in mind that they are separate. So now looking at some definitions of human resource management, we can see one definition, Boxwell and Purcell 2003 states they are all the activities associated with the management of employment relationship in the firm. Another definition by Watson 2010 states that HRM is the managerial utilization of the efforts, knowledge, capabilities and committed behaviors which people contribute to authoritatively coordinated human enterprise as part of an employment exchange or more temporary contractual agreement to carry out work tasks in a way which enables the enterprise to continue into the future. So here we're thinking about what we need, who we need, why we need these people to contribute to the success of the organization. Goals of HRM. Well, some of the goals of HRM, kind of like what we covered in the last assignment, includes to support the organization in achieving its objectives by developing, implementing HR strategies that are integrated with the business strategy. So kind of like here we're touching upon the goal in terms of SHRM, strategic human resource management, and we're really thinking about hard best fit linking into the aims and objectives of SHRM, and we'll be looking at later on the model of undertaking and the sequence of events for SHRM. Goals include to contribute to the development of high performance culture, ensure the organization has talented, skilled, and engaged people it needs, create a positive and trusted employment relationship between management and employees, and encourage ethical approach to people management. Well, yeah, these are all the goals of HRM, but ultimately, if you think about SHRM, they're the goals to meet the overall mission, vision of the company, the objectives of the organization. Why? If it's a private sector in the company, then we are talking about to make a profit, to be sustainable, to last the distance. And in order to do that, you need to gain a competitive advantage. And the way to do that is to focus. One way is to focus on the key assets of the business, which are the people, and the functionality and what HRM implements will have a big impact in terms of, the people and how they perform and how they grow into the organization and become that valuable asset. So we're still thinking about, who do we need, why do we need them, where do we need them to go, what do they need, how we're going to get them, and when do we want them. Let's look at some of the characteristics from different research findings, and to look at the industry and compare it to kind of like other industries generally. So if we look, one big factor is that there's a 46, if according to this research, 46% of people between the ages of 16 and 29 are work within the hospitality and tourism industry. In terms of the entire economy of the UK, in direct comparison, 16 to 29-year-olds represent only 24%. So we can see that automatically there's a big difference in terms of the hospitality and tourism industry having a greater amount of young people working in the industry, and we'll come on to and look at who these people are. Into this, this research tells us that 51% in this industry are female, so more females than males, and according to this, 57% are managers, directors, and seniors are male. If we compare it to the rest of the economy, we can see that for the rest of the economy, females represent a lower percentage, whereas males, 53%, represents a higher percentage. And in terms of managers, there's a greater, percentage of male managers in the rest of the economy. Likewise, if we look at the migrant workers, 24% of hospitality and tourism workforce is made up of migrant workers, whereas for the rest of the UK workforce, this only represents 16%. When we look at, migrant workers coming from EU countries, 45% come from EU countries. In comparison to the rest of the UK economy, we're talking about 42%. Let's look at some additional facts. So, well, Wood's 1997 describes the so-called marginal workers as women, young workers, casual employees, students, relatively high numbers of part-timers and migrant workers. So here, when we look at the people, the main 46%, according to one research, who work in this industry, they're young people between the ages of 16 to 29. But these people are migrant workers, they're casual workers, they're young workers, they're women, they're students, they're relatively high numbers of part-timers and migrant workers. When another research tells us that, according to People First 2006, they say that 50, for women within the UK, women make up 58% of the tourism and hospitality industry. So as opposed to the previous research, it said about 51%, But from People First, they're saying it's 58% in 2006. If you compare that to the UK economy as a whole, well, the UK economy as a whole, which had a lower percentage in other industries of 47%. So we can see a stark difference here in terms of more women working in this industry. And even though there's more women, even in this industry, there's still more male managers and directors, senior people. So, more specifically, the hospitality subsector is, indicative of the broader sector of having a higher proportion of part-time employees. Part-time employees, you know, 52% than other industries within all other sectors, being 25%. So if you compare, in terms of whether they're full-time or part-time, it's a huge percentage of people, working part-time, 52% in comparison to the other UK industries in the UK economy being 25%, according to HTF, 2003. Likewise, we mentioned before that young people are prominent. From this research from People First, 2006, they say up until from the eight, from the ages under 24 is and 58% under 34. So up to the age of 34, it represents 58% of people working in this industry, which is a huge amount of young people up to the age of, related to this last point. A significant part of the tourism and hospitality workforce, again we mentioned before, are students, seasonal migrant workers. Students are increasingly important segment of the labour market for hospitality and tourism. They are flexible. They can work long hours. They work on social hours. So very, very important for this industry. What else do we know about, a snapshot of the HRM workforce? We know, as we said before, they're prepared to work for low wages and are flexible in their working patterns. Canny 2002. Curtis and Lucas 2001, describes it a coincidence of needs between the employers and students. It's kind of like a good. Again, if we look at, the number of ethnic minority workers in the broad hospitality, leisure, travel, and tourism sectors, 11%, slightly higher than the overall average industry figure outside the T&H industry of 9.6%. So it's just slight qualifications of this. There's a big difference between the qualifications because we can see only 12% of the employees in hospitality and leisure and tourism have a degree or equivalent, as opposed to the other wider economy in the UK as being 29%. So, the people in, this sector are less well qualified in comparison. We are talking about people. So when we look at the first question, in terms of the introduction and the characteristics of the tourism and hospitality industry, you want to be able to bring in all these facts and figures, and you want to make a comparison between the makeup of the tourism and hospitality industry and how this differs to the, because they were based in the UK, how this differs to the rest of the UK economy and industry stats and data. So you want to make that comparison, between the two. A very important thing to just recap on, because we're talking about human resource management functions. Obviously, the general functions of a manager includes to plan, organize, direct, and control. And then, as we did in the last assignment, the HRM functions include procurement, development, compensation, integration, and maintenance. And then within these sections, you have different subsections of job functions that the HRM manager would need to carry out. So there's a lot in here, and all this contributes, and how they're designed and what they do depends upon whether it's a hard approach or a soft approach, if it's a best fit approach, or if it's a best practice approach, or if it's linked into SHRM. So all of these functionality will change and kind of like emerge differently depending upon the philosophy and the emphasis that's being placed from an organizational perspective. So, if we look at again the question, introduction, what is particularly different about the nature of the tourism and hospitality industry? What makes human resources harder to manage? Again, we have all this information. So now we're kind of like moving on to the methods, helping to resolve these characteristics of the industry. We're going to look at a video. um, there's a video there outlining the difference between hard and soft. Um, because you know, when you adopt the functions of HRM, you have to say to yourself, well, what approach am I going to adopt? And the approach, how you carry out the functions of HRM will depend upon the stance that you're taking and the view that you're taking. When we look at the hard approach, we're saying to ourselves, as well as providing a concise definition, Story 1987 also provided one of the earliest and most enduring attempts to recognize the different approaches to HRM. So, Story 1987 was one of the first people to. The hard version is seen to be an instrumental and economically rational approach to human resource management. Rational approach, okay? In this view, people management strategies are driven by strategic considerations to gain competitive advantage, maximizing control and achieving the lowest possible labor cost. So, getting the most out of your people through techniques, trying to focus on that with the aims and objectives of the organization, but utilizing and seeing the people as an asset to the company, like you would like a machinery or a plant or whatever, or another asset, and trying to maximize that asset. This approach is quantitative and calculative, and labor is, a commodity resource, the same as any other. Okay. On the other hand, we have the soft version, which is seen, to be much more about adopting the humanistic and developmental approach to human resource management. Human approach in terms of the Hawthorne studies, Mayo, and various other humanistic type psychologists who adopted motivation theory to get the best out of you people, to be creative. Again, this is going to depend on the industry in terms of what approach you actually adopt. As a result of an organization's people management approach, it's likely to be more consensual and is based on a high level of managerial commitment to employees, which is intended to lead to a mutual high commitment from employees, high trust, high productivity. You get high creativity, and if you're going to get the best out of someone, then this approach might be the best way, depending upon the circumstance and situation, to get the best out of someone. Employees are seen as being proactive, capable of being developed, and worthy of trust and collaboration. So we can see in terms of a hard approach and a soft approach. And again, when we look at the hard approach, we see that employees are subordinates to managers. Probably in a hierarchical type organizational structure. There is rejection of the difference in viewpoints between managers and workers. So it's what the manager says is more autocratic than taking the views of the workers. Rejection of industrial relations, individualistic. Manager, takes precedent. Emphasis on working efficiency, sharp financial focus on achieving the sharp financial focus. But then in direct comparison, you're looking at the soft approach, and you're saying humanistic thinking, the Hawthorne studies, workers viewed as assets to the firm, development on the core employees involvement and commitment encouraged, emphasis on employee relations, more concerned with employees views, so more democratic, more open, getting people to really bring out the best in their creativity and their talents. And in order to do that, you really need to be motivated to do this, to be able to think freely and to bring out the best in someone. So as well as the hard and soft approach, we are saying to ourselves, well, we also have a best fit approach, which is traditional of the hard approach, and the best practice approach, which is prominent of the soft approach. So if we look at the best fit about the organization being affected by the environment, probably the pestle, the political, economic, social, legal, technological, and environmental factors. So again, best fit schools argues that, for an approach of HRM which is fully integrated with the specific organization and environmental context in which they operate. So the environment context and how the environment affects that organization is linked into a best fit approach, which is linked to a hard approach. But when we look at Schudner and Jackson 1987, they looked at three typologies in terms of the needed role behaviors of organizations. And depending upon what they were saying, was within the best fit approach in terms of the different typology, whether it's an innovation strategy, the quality management enhancement strategy, or cost reduction strategy, then you would adopt the functions of HRM differently depending upon the different typology of or different way of thinking for that organization. So, innovation strategy, here organizations, adopting this approach seek to develop an environment where innovation is allowed to flourish. Given these characteristics, the type of HRM strategy flowing from this approach is based on having a large number of highly skilled individuals who are likely to enjoy high levels of autonomy. Again, so if you are looking for this type of characteristic in a high innovation strategy, you're going to need highly skilled people. So then all of your functionality will be different in how you employ someone in this type of typology as opposed to a different typology. For example, in this typology, if you're looking for a highly skilled individual, if we take the case of a KPMG, which is a well-known accountancy firm which offers accountancy services and project management to other companies, well, they first have an online test, and an online test you would have to either get 90-95% pass rate in this online test before you can move on to the next test, and then that would be followed by a telephone interview or a short telephone interview to question you. Then that would be followed by, if you pass that, then a group interview, and if you pass that group interview and you did well, then that would be followed by another panel interview. So when it's not the normal place an ad in the papers and then see what actually happens. It's actually investing the money into this type of approach in terms of development and investment, looking to get the right person, which involves a lot of time from a lot of people to actually achieve this. The quality enhancement strategy, well, the competitive advantage is gained by support total quality approach. These practices include encouragement of feedback, systems, teamwork, decision making, and responsibility being an integral part of the employee's job description, and flexible job classifications. So again, we're talking about encouragement, feedback, teamwork, decision making, responsibility being an integral part of an employee's job. So again, the structure and the format of how teams are formed, the organizational structure, how the HRM is integral in terms of that strategy, and how they monitor and develop and support and coach and mentor, and how they implement all these different type of things, and then monitor what's happening and monitor the progress of these people. So again, a different type of HRM, same functions, but how the functions are carried out are different depending upon the typology of the organization. Cost reduction strategy. Again, in this strategy, we're saying that there are tight controls, minimization of overheads, and pursuit of economies of scale in the pursuit of increased productivity. In following such a strategy, organizations may use a higher number of part-timers, seek to simplify the measures via work now defined jobs, and encourage specialization and efficiency, and offer short-term results orientated appraisal. Again, we've seen this in fast food places, in McDonald's, and places that have a high turnover. You have tight controls, minimization of overheads, and again you have targets. I mean, if you think about a cashier at McDonald's will have a specific job or it might just do the cashier, or they might do a number of different tasks, generally focusing or specializing in a certain area. But then they would be monitored and assessed. So a cashier would normally have, McDonald's would say, they know how many people should be served in an hour by this person on a specific day at a specific time, and then they can monitor that and they can assess whether that person are meeting those standards, to the standards that have normally been met on average, or if they're above that target or below that target. And they can, seek to, offer some kind of bonus if that's the case or not, or provide additional training. So a cost reduction strategy, again, the HR is quite instrumental in this approach. When we're looking at hard and soft, the best fit approach is about a hard approach, emphasis on contingent relationship or alignment between the organization's human resource policies and practices and its business strategy in terms of the external context of the firm, so taking into consideration the environment. This also includes vertical integration, like a traditional hierarchical type structure, gained through HR policies, procedures, and processes, and is therefore acknowledged as a key element of best fit for SHRM. So we're talking about hard approach, best fit approach, linking into strategic human resource management. We're talking about life cycle models, emphasis the alignment of appropriate HR policies and practices for the various life stages of a business, and also competitive advantage models, emphasis on alignment of relevant HR policies and practices with generic competitive advantage strategies. So again, this is the approach from a best fit, hard approach. So, what about, is going to be best fit or best practice? So when we look at best fit, we have to also weigh up whether or not we want best practice. Um, so what? So whilst arguments for best fit advocate a close fit between competitive strategies of HRM, and those favour best practice approaches to HRM, suggest that there's a universal one-way approach to manage people. I'm not sure if I agree with that, but this is the view. There's a one universal way. Enhanced commitment from employees leading to improved organisational performance, high levels of service quality, and ultimately increases in productivity and profitability. Redmond and Matthews, 1988, outline a range of HR practices with regards to best practice. Let's have a look at a video as regards to best fit or best practice. So, the best practice approach, Redmond and Matthews, 1998, outlined a range of HR practices. So, practices going through the whole function in terms of recruitment selection, recruitment selecting staff with the correct, attitude and behavioral characteristics. And again, a range of assessments in the selection process should be utilized to evaluate work values, personality, interpersonal skills, and problem solving abilities of potential employees to assess their service orientation. Again, within the recruitment and selection process in this good industry practice. I know before that I've been for various interviews, and I don't know if you've ever had a psychometric testing. So a lot of companies, in terms of best practice approach, will try and find out more about the behavioural characteristics of of someone by a psychometric test. And a psychometric test aims to try and bring this out, and a kind of industry standard to see if you are suitable for that organisation's culture. At retention and teamwork. Well, with the retention, the need to avoid the development of a turnover culture, which may, of course, particularly be prevalent in tourism and hospitality. For example, the use of retention bonuses to influence employees to stay. You know, there are some businesses which state that in the Marriott hotel, for instance, they state if 1%, if they have 1% increase in the rate of turnover within their organization, they state it will lead to anywhere between an additional cost annually to the organization between 5 and 15 million US dollars. So for every 1% of turnover of people in the Marriott hotel, you're talking about a cost, annual cost, anything between 5 and 15 million US dollars. Well, that's a lot of money to be losing out of a cost because of the rate of turnover. So again, the functionality in terms of reducing that turnover and what methods you put into place would be very important. Teamwork, to use of semi-autonomous, process and multifunctional teams. We look at the appraisal side, a move away from the traditional top-down approaches to appraisal and supporting things, such as customer evaluation, peer review, team-based performance, and the appraisal of managers by subordinates. So managers being appraised, by their subordinates. Generally, all of these performance appraisal systems should focus on the quality goals of an organization and the behaviors of employees needed to sustain these. Likewise, for best practice, regards to training and development, to the need to equip, operative level staff with team working and interpersonal skills to develop their service orientation. The managers with a new leadership style which encourage to move to a more, facilitative and coaching style to managing. So again, training and development future managers to be able to manage their staff. I know that, I've had loads of training and development during my years, and one of the best training things I went on was a time management course. Having that, to manage your time, to be able to utilize your time effectively and efficiently, to be able to spend more time with your staff. Very, very important. Very, very important. Likewise, for best practice, the rewarding quality and the job security, the need for a more creative system of rewards, and in particular the need for payment systems and reward employees for attaining quality goals. Very important. You see these in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, in terms of their psychological needs and then their safety needs. We look at this in terms of Hertzberg's two-factor theory, in terms of satisfying and dissatisfying factors, and pay being a dissatisfying factor. If you feel you're not being paid for the work that you're actually doing, again, can demotivate someone. Job security, promises of job security are seen as an essential component of any, overall quality approach. So best fit or best. But when we are talking about, a best practice, we're talking about a soft approach. So a soft approach strategy goes beyond achieving fit. So it's not about fit and resource allocation to achieving stretch and resource leverage for emphasizing the importance of both tact, explicit knowledge, and the ability of employees to learn. Very, very important. So when we look and we go back to the suggested layout again, we covered the introduction with the differences in the types of people who work in the tourism and hospitality industry, and we've compared that to other industry sectors. And then we've also looked at the methods are helping resolve these characteristics of the industry. We've looked at the possibilities of, should we adopt a hard approach or a soft approach, a best fit approach or a best practice approach. What method should we go for? And if we're going for a best fit approach, there are different typologies that we could look at within that sector of a hard approach, depending upon the organizational culture and the strategy of the organization. So now we're going to be looking at the critically assessing the strategic contribution of human resource management to business success. Why is human resource management important to the strategic business success of hospitality organizations? So we're going to be looking at the contribution of SHRM, strategic human resource management, and the model. And obviously SHRM, as we've discussed previously, is really linked to the hard approach and the best fit approach to, and it's all about getting the right person for the right job at the right time. And there are lots of people out there, and making sure that we get it right the first time, and that this person is the right person for the job, and that will add value to the organization and therefore give the organization a competitive advantage. Look at strategic HRM. um, that short video kind of talks about what is SHRM, strategic human resource management. Let's look at the sequence of the strategic human resource management. We can see that we have the sequence here, but above this sequence you have obviously the mission, the vision, the mission, the aims and objectives of the organization. And then, when we look at strategic HR, and we say to ourselves, well, we analyze the environment, which may be, SWOT and pastel. What is happening? What's good and what's not bad? What are the issues? What are the problems? What does the business need? And then we need to conduct a diagnosis of this. Why do these issues exist? What are the cause of these problems? What factors are influencing, the situation? And then, we're going to be providing conclusions and recommendations from this. What are our conclusions from this analysis? What alternative strategies are available? Then we'll be looking at action planning. The action planning are, what actions do we need to take to implement, the proposals? What problems, may we meet, and how will we overcome them? Who will take the action and when? And then we have resource planning, where kind of like the strategic human resource management will come in. What resources will we need? What money do we need? What people do we need? And what time do we need? And it's it's the people in here. What people do we need with the right skills, with the right philosophy that we're going to adopt to achieve the mission and vision and aims, given what we've analysed and diagnosed, and come to our conclusions and action planning. What do we need, taking all these things into consideration? And then the benefits. What are these benefits actually going to give us? What are the benefits to the organisation in terms of implementing these proposals? And how do they benefit individual employees? How do they satisfy the business needs? So if you take the example of KPMG in terms of, looking at getting the best of the best and the cream of the crop in terms of your interviewing process, in terms of the online tests, telephone interview, group presentations and panel interview, and then the training and development after that. Can they quantify it? Can they actually see the results of the people who actually work for KPMG? And I'm sure that they can. And I'm sure that they know that system actually works. But when we look at strategic management, we're really looking at three areas in terms of the context, the components, and the capabilities. And let's we're saying increasing rapidly shifting external environment, the external environment, looking back to SHRM and linking back to best fit. The environment being linked appears to be driving in both, the multi-stakeholder business strategies, and highlighting the importance of a strategic approach to people management, context, the environment constantly shifting, rapidly shifting. We look at the components in terms of the corporate priorities and responsibilities. These should be focused on how people are managed in the employer and in other in the HR function and its work. Core priorities and responsibilities, how these people are managed. In Direct Line, they recently, for the last, I think 3 years ago, they introduced the graduate training program. And within their graduate training program, it was a long and extensive interviewing process. Then they had these graduates training for 3 years. And they did a lot of HRM function. People learn in a specialist area. They had mentors, they had support, and they even moved staff around. So if they were working at the Bromley head office branch, then they would have to eventually move to work in Leeds or Birmingham or Scotland. So they've got other branches in Scotland, in Glasgow, in Leeds, and in Birmingham. So you would have to take a secondment in one of these areas for 6 months and work in a service pot in a department that you've never worked before. Why? Because they see you as a valuable asset to the business, and they see that they want to invest within that employee to get them to understand the business better. And the only way to understand the business better is to work in different departments across different areas of the UK. And so you gain that understanding, which is very difficult to gain unless you go out there and you live it. But then what let them down was kind of like in the last year when the graduates had graduated, but then there was no additional pay increase for graduates who were kept on to the organisation. So again, that could be quite disheartening and demotivating. Again, I don't quite think it was properly thought through in terms of the core priorities and responsibilities. It started well, but it didn't quite finish off as well as it could have. If we look at the capabilities in terms of implement people management strategies, focus on line managers, and the people management capability by the HR function is common, to all our case studies. Okay. So, when we talk about SHRM, we are looking at, on vertical integration, vertical in terms of hierarchical type structure, and the alignment between HR strategy and business strategy. This top-down perspective, or hard HRM, was modified, in consideration of the horizontal integration of HR practices, with an integrated bundle shown in many research studies to have a potential powerful impact on 10 strategic HRM in practice on performance. So again, as well as being a vertical top-down approach, there's also a horizontal integration as well with HRM practices within this hard approach, best fit to strategic human resource management. So again, this is the sequence of HRM management, strategic HRM management, and ultimately the benefits in terms of looking at this and implementing the functionality in line with the missions, aims, and objectives of the organization with the right people, and developing them in line with that is to get the best out of them, to get them to perform, and to get them to be a valuable asset where they can perform and be very, very productive to the organization, thus making it sustainable through the growth and continued kind of like pipeline of these people who are absolutely valuable to the success of the organization. Again, these functionality here, which leads into how these are carried out, how the wage and salaries are carried out, job satisfaction, grievance, you know um, how you mentor someone, how you carry out all these things within that function will depend upon what and how it's carried out is going to definitely depend upon if it's a hard approach or soft approach, and if it's going to be SHRM type approach with a horizontal and vertical integration of of different functions within the organization. Again, when we're looking at this, we kind of like looked at the introduction, looked at the methods in terms of hard and soft, looked at best fit and best practice. The next question, we kind of looked at SHRM and the sequence of events and how the SHRM functions of human resource management will change depending upon the approach, linking into the whole sequence of the SHRM approach. And then, again, you will need to carry out this, what difficulties are there in balancing strategic goals and employee goals. Again, you will need to look at this and analyze this. And the best way to do that is to look at SHRM and look at what you want to achieve and look at how that conflicts with ultimately the employee goals, which may not necessarily be all of the employee goals in terms of what they actually want. Some people may want to spend less time. In fact, when taking a high job at KPMG, you tend to work long hours and a lot of hours trying to perform and achieve and take on more responsibilities, which means ultimately if you have a family, then you will have less time at home. How does that balance? What about the employee goals, personal goals, CPD goals? Again, because this is all tied into employee motivation. So now we're going to look at how does employee performance impact upon the pursuit of organization success. We've kind of looked at that. Let's look at employee performance, performance management, and performance appraisal. A performance appraisal links into performance management, so it's a part of performance management. So when we look at performance appraisal, we can see on the left hand screen at the bottom that performance appraisal actually links into performance management. And what are the different elements of performance management? Well, performance management, setting objectives and reviewing those objectives, having personal development plans, you know, career and succession planning, coaching and mentoring, very important, competence assessment, performance related pay, very, very important as well. If you think you're performing and you're going above and beyond and you're putting all the hours in, one, you're hoping it's going to be recognized if you're doing a good job, and two, you're hoping that it's going to be reflected in your performance related pay. Self appraisal, 360-degree appraisal, and subordinate feedback. Again, these elements all link into performance management, which is important to motivating that employee to becoming fully, if you're taking Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of the top level, self-actualized, moving towards self-actualization, but moving up the pyramid in terms of the psychological needs, health and safety needs, love and belonging needs, self-esteem needs, and then self-actualization needs. So you could point to someone becoming self-actualized in terms of performance management as being part of this process to lift someone up. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, his pyramid. When we look at the performance review meeting, very, very important. Within that performance review meeting, you need to make sure that you have various elements that are key to this. In order for this to work, you need to have agreement. There needs to be measurement to know whether or not you've actually met your targets as agreed. There needs to be feedback, regular feedback, as regards to how well you're doing or not, or what corrective action you might need to take, or what additional help you might need in terms of training. You need positive reinforcement and dialogue. Very, very important elements to performance management meeting. Cycle of performance management, planning in terms of the role, objectives, competencies, performance improvement, personal development, act in terms of the performance activities, carry out the role, implementation, implement personal development plan, monitor, manage performance throughout the year, monitor performance, provide continuous feedback, provide coaching, deal with under pressure, and also the review, dialogue, feedback, performance assessment, agree the strengths, build on the strengths, and agree areas for improvement. And again, this is a continuous cycle. So the cycle is not just done once. It's a continuous cycle which goes on and on. When we look at that, performance management, it's a rounded approach. Performance appraisal should be part of a more rounded performance management approach. It is a mistake to assume that performance management finishes after the results of the employee appraisal have been gathered and analysed. So as we've said before, performance management is a never-ending cycle, and the cycle and the process keeps going, and that person keeps getting better and better, and moving. If you think about Maslow, moving up Maslow's pyramid. So how does performance management contribute to organizational performance? Well, in a number of ways. It contributes because it communicates a shared vision throughout the organization, support leadership and management styles, a shared vision, a mission that everyone is working towards. It defines the individual requirements, thus reducing confusion and ambiguity. Provides a framework and environment for teams to develop and succeed. Provides the climate and systems which support, reward, and communicate how people for the organization can achieve improved performance, and it helps people to manage ambiguity. So again, these are some of the ways that it contributes to organizational performance, getting and developing that organizational culture to adopt a certain way of working to achieve the company's success, the mission and the visions, the aims and objectives. It's all about 7 critical questions about performance management. What do we mean by performance? How can we identify good or poor performance? How can we establish the cause of good or poor performance? How can we motivate people to perform well? How do we deal with underperformers? How can we do this fairly and consistently? And how do we achieve line managers buy-in? So again, all this is all, getting to the stage of, looking at what we mean by performance, and then defining that clearly so that that performance can actually be measured over a period of time, and to see if that employee is achieving those targets or not, and if not, why not, and what's the course of action, and if so, what can be done to support these people to keep on achieving. And this all leads down to one thing. It leads down to greater productivity, greater efficiency, and lowering costs within your profit and loss account. We can also look at the project management objectives findings from an e-survey, reward survey in 2005. And from this reward survey in 2005, we found that 64% aligned individual and organization objectives. So 64% of people felt that, companies felt that employees had aligned towards organization objectives. 63% of these companies felt that there had been improved organizational performance due to performance objectives. Again, from these performance objectives, informed pay decisions, 21% felt that. With regards to developing a performance culture, from these organizations, from the e-survey, felt that the organization had developed a performance culture. As regards to individual improved performance, from these companies felt that due to the performance objectives, 46% had seen an improved individual performance. Likewise, the basis for personal development, 37% felt that people had the basis for personal development, 37%. Now we kind of like looked at performance management and the purposes of performance management and how it helps towards organizational success. Now we're kind of like looking at the purpose of job evaluation. Job evaluation, very, very important. Job evaluation, very, very important to determine what methods you actually adopt to provide an equitable, fair and consistent and transparent basis for determining the relative job values. Job evaluation to help in the management of job relativities, to provide a basis for the design and maintenance of a rational and defensible grade structure, and to provide the basis for ensuring that equal pay for work and equal value is achieved. The purpose of job evaluation, very important. When we look at different approaches for job evaluation, we're saying that there are different approaches, including kind of like an analytical job evaluation, a non-analytical job evaluation, and a market pricing approach to valuing jobs. And these are different approaches to determining what approach you should adopt to when, depending upon the job that you want to advertise for. So what type of approach should you adopt? Are you going to adopt an analytical job evaluation, a point factor rating or analytical matching, decisions on a relative value or size of the job based on the analysis of a degree to which various defined elements or factors are present in the form and demands of the job holder. So therefore, you have a range of different sections and then subsections of different elements, and you give them a rating and a ranking. And when you interview these people, then you give them a score for each section and subsection, and then you total up the scores afterwards, and then you may get a final score, which will then give you a comparison to to reduce bias in terms of the person, and to look at the numbers on the statistical information that you've gathered on these people. You can adopt a non-analytical job evaluation, job classification or ranking. Whole jobs are described and compared to slot them into a defined grade or place them in a rank order without analysing them to each element. So you're saying a manager's role in Tesco, assistant manager, um, section manager, supervisor, employee, part-time, full-time, and so on and so forth. How do they rank in terms of the different jobs, and slot them into a kind of like a defined grade or place. And then you have market pricing. Jobs are placed in a pay structure entirely on the basis of external, relatives, market rates, method of pricing jobs, but not job evaluation as usually defined. So these are different approaches to valuing jobs. Some of the features of job evaluation. The features of job evaluation includes to, maximize objectivity by, basing judgments on factual evidence rather than opinion. And the aim here is to achieve consistency. All too easy to make prejudgments on the person because you may like some of their attributes or not, but can you base it on factual evidence rather than opinion? Features include providing a framework of defined yardsticks to channel judgments. Again, setting benchmarks and standards that you want to meet. Evaluate the job, not the person. Concerned only with, internal relativities, applicable only to analytical or non-analytical job evaluation schemes. Okay, evaluate the job and not the person. All too easy to evaluate the person. Some of these, ways of evaluating in an analytical way includes using a factor plan, and you look at, for instance, the levels, different levels, 1 to 6. If it's the expertise, decisions, autonomy, responsibility, interpersonal skills. With these, you will give them a scoring. Are they at level 3? Are they level 4? Level 5 for expertise, decisions, and then you give them a total score. So you're doing it in a very analytical and systematic approach. Now, so we've looked at performance management and the reasons why performance management is necessary, and also the different approaches in terms of when hiring someone, what approach do you adopt, an analytical, non-analytical approach. And the other area is, because we want to get the right person for the right job, and what we don't want to do is to have a higher turnover than is in normally normal for that industry. So if we look at the tourism and hospitality industry, it's characterized by a high turnover rate, but that's understandable to a degree because you've got young people ages between 16 to 29, or 16 to 34. 58% of people working in this industry, or 16 to 29, 46% of people. So you've got a lot of young people, migrant workers, women, part-timers, underpaid, overworked, and overstretched. So you have a high turnover with lower qualifications than generally in other industries. So that's predominantly the turnover rate. But this is important because, as I mentioned before, in the Marriott Hotel estimated that for every 1% increase in its employee turnover rate, the company loses 5 to 15 million US dollars in annual revenue. That's a huge amount of money to lose because you're turning over people and you have to retrain and recruit and train employees all the time. So if you can reduce that amount, then you'll be saving costs for the company. So when we're looking at employee turnover, we're saying to ourselves, what is it, prevention or cure? Prevention is better than cure. Again, areas that may affect employees' well-being. So we need to look at the areas that may affect employees, and the areas that may affect employees, includes the work environment. Like, if the work environment is not conducive, then maybe someone is not going to be motivated or want to work in that environment. Behavior, how does the manager treat their staff? Do they treat them fairly and equally, or do they treat them badly? Because that was going to have an effect in terms of how people feel, and how people feel is going to affect how motivated they are or not. balance. If you're overstretched and overworked and stressed out to such a degree, well, people can only take so much before they look for something else, and they try to look for something which has more of a work-life balance. Managing stress and sexual harassment, again, these are areas that can affect someone's well-being and motivation to want to work. Tactics as well, if you're being bullied. So these are all the areas that could affect people, and these are the areas that needs to be looked into: the work environment, managerial behavior, work-life balance, managing stress, sexual harassment, bullying. All these areas are something that, to reduce the turnover of people throughout your organization, these should be considered. And it should be considered because to keep hiring more and more people is a cost to the organization. Companies should act in a socially responsible way to provide a good quality of working life. Excessive stress causes illnesses. It can be a result in inability to cope with the demands of the job, which of course creates more stress. And excessive stress can reduce employee effectiveness and therefore organizational performance. And we seem to forget this in organizations. By putting too much stress on people can reduce the productivity of employees. Even though we feel we're giving them more work, in fact they may not be doing the work in the most efficient and effective way, or to the standards that's required it to be done. you know, um, Concerns for employees' well-being, includes the welfare rationale, GOS 1994, legal reactive welfare policy driven by legislative requirements, corporate conscience, how over time this welfare approach becomes increasingly seen as soft and indulgent. you know so again, we need to look at the welfare rationale as well. And we have moved forward, I think, in workplaces. I know that when a couple has a baby, the woman has up to 6 months off after the baby is born. um, but equally, the husband now can get 2 weeks off. Even the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, will be taking a few weeks off as PM for having his baby. But back in the 80s, it wasn't really seen as a done thing for, if you had a baby, for the male to take 2 weeks off. It wasn't really seen as a done thing in those days. So now we're moving on to quality management, and some of the areas of and the issues of quality management linked to the tourism and hospitality industry, because this links back into the. So when we look at the definition, the totality of features and characteristics of a product or service that bear on its ability to satisfy a given need. BSI 1979, as quoted by Jones and Robinson. Okay, so the totality of features and characteristics of a product or service that bear on its ability to satisfy a given need. The importance of quality management tourism organizations, highly intensifies the level of competition in the industry caused by the globalization. So you've got low barriers, you've got more companies entering into the industry. So you need a competitive advantage, and the way to gain a competitive advantage is to look at total quality management, look at getting the best out of your employees, and in incorporating some of these practices and principles in order to set standards, benchmarks, and to see how you can improve things rather than underachieving and underperforming. So quality management helps you to set these levels and standards. Customer satisfaction seen as a major indicator of good service quality. Environmental quality, clean atmosphere, water, can act as a major attraction, or an impediment, either way. So when we look at the challenges in tourism, we can see that the effect of external factors such as weather, transportation, product, service, sightseeing is affected by weather. We look at the tourism and hospitality industry today, and we see the pandemic of the coronavirus. The pandemic of the coronavirus in worldwide or in the UK, has shut down the bars, has shut down the restaurants, has shut down a lot of the transport. It's shut down traveling on airplanes. It's shut down all the travel agents. So again, and when will they recover? Because there is no cure for it at the moment. There are suggestions there may be a cure coming forward, but there is no cure at the moment. So how will people social distance? How will people react to these things? What will people do? So um, you know, so challenges in the tourism and hospitality industry, as seen by today, crises of viruses and threats of terrorism attacks and pandemics. Yeah, so definitely big challenges out there. So, because of these challenges, we're saying to ourselves, there are various schemes and total quality management schemes, Six Sigma, eco labels, international organizations of standardization, ISO, and the EU Foundation of Quality Management, EFQM. ISO 9001 is what we have for quality standards. This quality standards really first started in the 1990s by legislation implemented by the government, and it started off with BS 5750. So, and the BS 5750 quality standards was designed to set minimum standards of quality um, within the British industry in terms of manufacturing, and retailers who were buying from manufacturers would only buy from manufacturers because of legislation who had the BS 5750 at that time. And BS 5750 then changed to ISO 9001, then it moved on to ISO 9002, and then it changed back to ISO 9001. And so we've got many different kind of like quality management schemes within here. We're not going to be looking at all of them. When we look at total quality, this is, the quality assurance is the term used to describe those activities which ensure that a contractually acceptable product is delivered by a project. In other words, a quality piece of product is one which, above all else, meets the customer requirements on a consistent and on a sustainable basis. So this is done and conducted. So we're meeting certain quality and standards on a consistent, sustainable basis. There are different ways, in terms of total quality management. You can use quality circles in terms of groups of employees who meet regularly to solve problems, trained in planning, problem solving, and statistical methods, often led by a facilitator. Very effective when done properly. Okay, quality circles, very good if you can meet up and implement these things. Benchmarking. I think benchmarking is very, very important. Benchmarking to determine what is the benchmark. From a benchmark team, identify benchmark partners, collect and analyze benchmarking information, take action to match or exceed the benchmark. Very, very important. So many industries don't benchmark, and they should benchmark throughout the whole organization. You take Marks and Spencers, for instance. Marks and Spencers, if you're going to relay a floor or relay a department, how long should the relay of a department take? How many staff should it take? And and what should the merchandising look like? How effective are all of these things benchmarked and measured for standards and quality? I don't think so. And we see so many times that so many organizations don't implement these principles. I don't know. I just think they don't implement these principles, which are so well known, it seems to be criminal. Just in time production. We see just in time production with companies like Toyota, where they've liaised with their suppliers and have partnerships going where their suppliers only supply them and they deliver their stock at the right day, at the right time, when needed, and so that you don't have warehousing staff, managers to picking and packers, and electricity and costs and huge costs there. So all the products and all the supplies and all the component parts are brought in just at the right time when it's needed. We've seen the same situation with Zara. Zara started off in Spain with one shop. Now they've got nearly 2,000 stores, if not more. And they're turning over 20 billion US dollars. 20 billion US dollars, and they're vertically integrated backwards, and they've got a just-in-time management system to supply their stores with the goods and and stock that they need at the right day at the right time. And then when that stock is gone, that stock is gone. So they are supplying their stores with what they need, and from concept to from concept to design to launch in their retail stores, it normally takes 6 weeks now, as opposed to 6 months by the time that fashion designers have gone on the catwalk. So again, just-in-time management principles are being seen in different industry sectors, like with Zara and like with Toyota and many other industries and companies. Um, but for total quality management techniques and principles, there are different types: tools for generating ideas, tools for organizing data, and tools for identifying problems. Let's have a look at some of these. Generating ideas, check sheets to see, you know, in terms of product defects, what hour is it, when, you know, so can we identify what hour and where those defects were? Can we then link these back to the people that were employed on that day and that time and that hour to see where the problems are actually scatter diagrams in terms of generating, you know, ideas in terms of productivity and absenteeism. How does that affect productivity with certain people as well? Diagrams as well, cause and effect. One of the key words in most questions is to analyze. Analyze means how to one factor affects another. Cause and effect. How does one factor affect another? And what's going to be the ultimate effect in terms of productivity and production? Again, tools for organizing data includes perpetual charts in terms of organizing data in the process and the steps in the process, what needs to be done where. Tools for identifying problems in terms of distribution charts and standard distributions, and what's an acceptable standard distribution, and does it fall outside that standard distribution, and if so, why? Is it within that tolerable acceptable level of tolerance? Statistical processes control charts. So there are many different tools for identifying problems, sorting problems out. If we look at in terms of the service industry, we could look at the Olive Garden in terms of what is going to be inspected. The busboy and the waiter. Serves water, the standard, within 1 minute, clears the entire items and crumbs prior to dessert. Knows, setting the standard, and then testing that standard to actually monitor and to see whether or not that's been met. And quality standards, checks being done. Again, if we take another one, department store, display area, stock rooms, sales clerks, and then the standards, and then testing whether these standards are actually being met. If they're not being met, why aren't they being met? Does more training need and are required, or what is actually are they overperforming? And if they're overperforming, do you actually give them recognition and credit? Do you actually use those people to train other people to do it in a more effective way to improve the standard? Service industry inspection, and another example here of Arnold Palmer Hospital. Again, in terms of the billing, pharmacy, lab nurse. Again, how many times are these total quality management inspections and standards and benchmarks and data actually collected and actually undertaken? Not much, because everyone seems to be inundated in terms of doing what they need to do. They tend to lose sight of total quality management and standards and benchmarking. And if you don't have benchmarking, you don't have total quality standards, then how on earth can you improve things if you don't know what you're trying to improve, from or what the standards are? You can't do it. So you need to have these systems in place. It is very. So we've kind of covered everything now. So if we look at what we've covered, we've broken down the keywords and the questions, and we've looked at the keywords in terms of the assignment criteria. We've looked at definitions of human resource management like we did previously, and we've broken down the sections in the task, because as well as the key questions, in the assignment brief we're given different sections in the task, and these different sections were broken down, and we've kind of like covered all of these different sections. Again, we've related, and I've said to relate these to different case examples and give as many company and case examples where you can, to illustrate and to show greater analysis, application and interpretation. And if you remember how we grade here, we grade onto 4 different areas. So we grade in terms of knowledge and understanding, we grade in terms of application, analysis and interpretation, we grade in terms of the presentation, and the research itself, and then we provided conclusions. So I hope today has been useful, and thank you today again from Mr. Tan.